I think it's maybe time to start. So, good afternoon, everybody. I'm chairing the session this afternoon. I am Monique Laurent. So, it's my pleasure to introduce this second series of lectures, which are organized by Poema. Poema is a training network on polynomial optimization. And this second series of lectures is going to be given by Edouard Pauwels. Edouard is professor at the University Paul Sabatier in Toulouse. He's jointly with the Maths department and the Department of Computer Science. Edouard is working on optimization, numerical optimization, applications in mathematics and biology, and also to machine learning. And in the recent years, Edouard is especially interested in application to machine learning, and he has done some works where he shows the big relevance of polynomial optimization. So it's a big pleasure that Edouard has accepted to give this series of lectures today. So there are 3 lectures, and he gives the first one this afternoon. So the rules, maybe I just recall, but I guess most of you know it. So please mute yourself. And if you have questions, you post them in the chat. And at some moments, Edouard will stop and look at the chat and check the questions and answer the questions. So that's it. The floor is yours. Edouard, please.
Thank you very much. So let me share maybe my screen up, share, and it's okay. So now I think you can see my presentation.
Yes.
Okay, good. So thank you very much. It's a great pleasure to give this series of lecture at Poema online workshop. And indeed, I will be talking about Christoffel Darboux kernels for polynomial optimization. And so the adverb, the qualificative for polynomial optimization is important here because the topic is vast, and I will only touch a few aspects which I think are important in the context of polynomial optimization. So before starting, I would like to say that I am currently working on an overview project with my colleagues Jean-Bernard Lasserre and Mihail Poutinard, and some of the content of the talk is inspired by our discussion and our work on this project. So first, some elements of context and motivation. So the term Christoffel Darboux kernel, the object itself is as old as the theory of orthogonal polynomials, which was very popular in the mathematics community starting from the 19th century. So it's an old topic. But it's still lively. One of the reasons is that fine properties of this Christoffel Darboux kernel have important consequences, for example, in approximation theory. So from polynomial optimization, it went to approximation theory. And again, the topic is still active today. So there is a lot of activity going on. And recently, it has been used in the context of polynomial optimization and also in the context of data analysis. And we will touch some of these aspects. Okay, how should it be useful in polynomial optimization? Why should it be useful in polynomial optimization? So for me, the key aspect is the following. So I didn't tell you what it is, but I can tell you that Christoffel Darboux kernel depends on probability measure. Let's call it mu. It will be called mu throughout the talk on the Euclidean space, let's say. So it's a kind of parameter for the kernel. One crucial aspect is that this kernel, this object, captures information on this probability measure. So for example, information about the support and also maybe information about the density. That's the first aspect. And the second aspect is that it is, so the CD kernel is easily computed from the knowledge of moments of this measure mu. And as a matter of fact, moments or pseudo-moments are typical outputs of Lasserre's hierarchy. Okay, so you had the introduction by Didier last week. Typical output of the hierarchy is a matrix of moments. How do you infer properties of the underlying measure from the moments? One possibility is to use the CD kernel, Christoffel Darboux kernel. Okay, so that's, let's say, a few words of introduction. Let's have a look at it with a picture. So in this picture, I represented a cloud of points. This cloud of points is depicting a probability measure mu. And this probability measure in this case is an empirical average. Okay, so I put 1 over n mass on each point, and this gives me measure mu. And the level sets are level sets of a certain polynomial, which is almost exactly the Christoffel-Darboux kernel. So you can see that the level set of this polynomial captures the shape of the cloud of points quite accurately. And another comment here is that since we are working with empirical measures, we will see some applications in statistics too. So the plan for today is to introduce this object, introduce the Christoffel-Darboux kernel, and describe some of its first properties. Okay, so let me. So the goal is to finish with the first part, so introduction of the Christoffel function, the Christoffel-Darboux kernel, and its relation with orthogonal polynomial and moments. And if we have time, we will see some of the elements highlighting the fact that the CD kernel captures properties of the underlying measure in the univariate case. But we'll try to focus on the first part. Okay. So as I told you, the kernel depends on a measure mu, which is given. So it will be a probability measure on RP. And I will denote by Rd of x the set of p-variate polynomials of degree at most d. So polynomials in p variable, and this space can be seen as a linear space, which dimension is this number, p plus d choose d, which we will denote by sd throughout the lecture. So once we have these two, we can introduce the following bilinear form. So it takes as input two polynomials, p and q, and it computes the integral of the product against mu. Okay, and this bilinear form will be denoted with the sign that is written here, and we will make hypotheses which ensure that this bilinear form, defines a valid scalar product on the set of polynomials of degree at most d. So I will not go into the details, but one sufficient condition for this to be well defined and to define a valid scalar product on the space of polynomials for each d is the following. So we will restrict mu to have compact support and to be absolutely continuous with respect to the Lebesgue measure. So in this case, you can check that the bilinear form here is indeed a scalar product. So there is an exercise in the exercise section. There is an exercise about it with more details regarding sufficient conditions for valid scalar product. So given these two, this thing, it turns out that actually the space Rd of x with the scalar product that we have defined is a finite dimensional Hilbert space. Okay, so it's a Hilbert space of functions. It can be seen as a Hilbert space of functions from Rp to R. So as I told you, there are more general conditions in the exercise to have a valid scalar product. I won't give you more details. So it turns out that Hilbert space of functions, in particular in finite dimension, they have an additional bunch of structure, and they can be seen as what is called reproducing kernel Hilbert space, and this is RKHS for short. So again, this is an old story. This was called in the beginning the Hilbert space method, and it started during the first half of the 20th century. And I give you here a few important names in this realm. So let's have a look at what it means to be a reproducing kernel Hilbert space. So I won't tell you all the details in full generality. I will just tell you what we need to know for our special case of kernel defined by polynomials and underlying measures. Okay, so we have the following results. For each d in n, there exists a symmetric polynomial. We will call it kd, indexed by mu. So it will be from Rp times Rp to R. Okay, so it will be polynomial in two variables, let's say. It will be symmetric. And so it will have the property that for each z, kd mu z, seen as a function of the second argument, is a polynomial of degree d. So this object exists, and it satisfies the following property. This property is called the reproducing property. So what is the reproducing property? The reproducing property says essentially that the pointwise, so for any polynomial p of degree at most d and any z, the pointwise evaluation of the polynomial p at point z, so p of z, can be represented, can be computed using the scalar product and the symmetric object that we have introduced here. And here I give you the explicit form. So using the definition of the scalar product that we had just before, this can be explicitly written as the following integral. So we integrate against x, okay, and the variable z is fixed. So this is called the reproducing property. And in this case, H is called the reproducing kernel Hilbert space. Is called a reproducing kernel Hilbert space. So it has a reproducing kernel. This thing can be generalized to any Hilbert space of function with continuous pointwise evaluation. I won't give you more details. And the Christoffel-Darboux kernel, the object that we will be talking about for a few hours, is the reproducing kernel of this space, so the space of polynomial, combined with the scalar product induced by mu. So I write the here, meaning that the kernel is unique. There cannot be two kernels which satisfy those hypotheses. Okay. So that's one first result, and I will try to give you some proof arguments. Okay, so let's start here. Okay, so we have a reproducing kernel. Okay, so let's prove the existence of this object. Okay, just to have an intuition of how it goes. So the first thing is to look at the evaluation map. So for any z in the space Rp, okay, I will consider the evaluation map. So the pointwise evaluation map, we will call it EZ, E index z. So it will be a function which will take as arguments a polynomial, and it outputs a real number. And for each p, polynomial of degree, okay, so sorry, here it's a d, it's a degree d. The output is p of z. Okay, so this map, we will call it E of z. This is the evaluation map. It computes the value of p at z. This is a linear map. Okay, EZ is a linear map. Okay, on the space of polynomials of degree at most d. And so as a linear map, I can represent it using the scalar product induced by mu. Okay, so there exists a p, okay, sorry, a p index z polynomial of degree at most d, okay, such that the function evaluation can be represented with the scalar product. So this writes like this. Okay, so the evaluation of any polynomial p is just the dot product between pz and mu. Okay, so this is just linear algebra on finite dimensional spaces. I can represent any linear map, any linear functional like this. Okay. And so this, what does it mean? It means that it means the following. So it's the same thing, but written a bit differently. So for any p polynomial of degree at most d, okay, we have E index z of p, which is again by definition p of z, and this thing is equal to the scalar product between p index z and p, and this is equal to the integral of pz of x, p of x, d mu of x, using the definition of the scalar product that we have used. Okay. So I claim the following. I claim that the object that we have constructed is symmetric. So it has some symmetry property, and it's as follows for any z and y in Rp. We have Pz of y equals Py of z. Okay, so Py would be the polynomial associated to the evaluation, pointwise evaluation at y. And we have equality here. And it's not hard to see because those two things are actually equal to the scalar product between Pz and Py. Okay, so using the definition of Pz and Py encodes evaluation at y, Pz encodes evaluation at z. So if I take dot product of Pz with Py, I have both interpretations. And since the scalar product is symmetric, those two things have to be equal. Okay, and so what the kernel here can be said to be, so it can be set as follows. We set k d mu of zy equal to pz of y, or if you like, equal to py of z, it doesn't matter. Okay, so this thing here, it satisfies the reproducing property by construction. Okay, this is the argument that I've just said. Now, the last thing that I need to tell you is unicity. Okay, so assume that there is a second reproducing kernel, so k tilde mu is symmetric and satisfy the reproducing property. Okay. So assume that we have a second kernel, then it has to be equal to the first kernel, and this is again easy to prove using the reproducing property. For any zy in Rp, okay, we have the following: the dot product between k d mu of z and k tilde d mu of y. Okay, so by the reproducing property, this has to be equal to the evaluation of k d mu z at y. So this is k d mu z y. But also using the reproducing property for the first kernel, this must be k tilde d mu of y evaluated at z. Okay, k tilde d mu of y z. Okay, so those two things are equal, and since we assume symmetry of the second kernel, and we already have symmetry of the first kernel, the two kernels are equal. Okay, so no question so far. Good. So let's get back to the presentation. So we have this reproducing kernel. The construction in general, RTHS is similar, but it's more complicated because you could be in an infinite dimension. But here in finite dimension, it all goes smoothly. So the Christoffel-Darboux kernel is the reproducing kernel of H. So H again is the space of polynomials of degree D combined with the scalar product induced by mu. And again, this scalar product was defined right before as the following bilinear form. And we enforce sufficient condition to have this define a valid scalar product. Okay, so let's see some of its properties. And the first property is that it can be easily computed from moments. So I keep this assumption on top. It's the same as before. It will be standing through most of the discussion. So I consider any basis of RD. Okay, so RD is a set of polynomials of degree D. So I consider a bunch of polynomials of degree at most D. I consider SD of them, and I want them to form a basis. And I consider the following map. So VD will associate to any X the column vector of pointwise evaluation of each of those polynomials at X. So essentially, this is the concatenation of the elements of the basis in a big vector. From this, I define the moment matrix M mu D to be the following integral. So I integrate VD transpose against d mu, and the integral here is understood pointwise, not pointwise, sorry, coordinate-wise, component-wise. So I integrate each coordinate. So for a fixed x, VD transpose is a matrix. So I integrate each coordinate of the matrix, each entry of the matrix against d mu. That gives me the moment matrix in R SD times SD. Okay, so then M mu D is invertible. M mu D is invertible because we have a valid scalar product. Okay, so that's we will skip. But the fact that we have a valid scalar product ensures that the matrix is invertible. And furthermore, we have the following for all xy. The kernel, the Christoffel-Garbou kernel, can be computed by a matrix inversion. So I just invert the matrix, multiply on the left and on the right by VD of x, VD of y. Before giving some proof arguments, let's see first some connection with other courses. So you had the introduction by Didier, and you will also have a tutorial on moments by Mihai. So usually we consider the canonical monomial basis, and in that case, the matrix that I define here is the usual moment matrix that is often manipulated in polynomial optimization. That's one first remark. And the second remark is, I think it's important, it does not depend on the choice of the basis. Okay, so the kernel here is unique. And so even if I change the basis, V will change, M will change, but the product here will not change. It has to be the same. Okay, so let's see some proof argument for that. Up. So this is computation from moments. Hop là. Okay, so again, I recall the notation M mu D is equal to the integral of VD of x transpose d mu of x. And this thing, if you look at it carefully, we mentioned that it's just integration of each component of the matrix. So it's just the matrix of the scalar product of Pi and Pj. So these are elements of the basis that we find in VD for Ij equals 1 to SD. Okay, so it's just the matrix of scalar product of polynomials of the basis. That's one thing. First point. Okay, I need a second point. So for any P in Rd of x, okay, I can represent P by its coefficient in the basis given by Vd. Okay, so there is Cp, which are the coefficients of P. This belongs to R to the Sd. Okay, so Sd coefficients such that for all x in Rp, the evaluation of the polynomial at x is given by the scalar product. Okay, so Cp transpose Vd of x. Okay, so the polynomial is simply represented in the basis given by Vd. Okay, so now let's compute using this for any pq in Rd of x. Okay, so in the set of polynomials of degree at most d, the scalar product of p and q is given by the integral of Cp transpose Vd of x transpose Cq d mu of x. Okay, so why is that so? Because we have that the thing here is p of x, and the thing here is okay, with the Cq here is q of x. Up, let's just write correctly q of x. Okay. So this is just the same thing in a different form, but now from this I can I can use linearity of the integral and put the vector CP and CQ outside. Okay, those are constants. They don't depend on x, so I can put them outside of the integral. Up, and you can see that this the matrix M is appearing. Okay, CP transpose M mu D CQ. Okay, so essentially the moment matrix M is the matrix which encodes the bilinear form given by the scalar product induced by mu. So the only thing that we need to do now to prove the claim is to verify the reproducing property. Okay, so let's give a name to our candidates. Okay, so we set R to be the function which goes from Rp times Rp to R. Okay, and to each pair xy, it will associate the value of interest. So Vd of x transpose M mu D inverse Vd of y. Okay, so this thing is obviously symmetric. For each fixed x, it's obviously a polynomial in y. Okay, it's just a constant vector multiplied by the big vector encoding the basis. So this is symmetric and polynomial in x and y of degree at most d. So it satisfies all we need except the reproducing property. So let's check the reproducing property. So for this, we need to choose to fix some z in Rp, and also we need to fit some p in Rd. Okay, so those are arbitrary, and I will ask that the coefficients of p are given by Cp. Cp, and this will be a vector of R to the Sd. Okay. And let's compute. So let's verify that the candidate R satisfies the following the reproducing property. And in this case, the reproducing property would be as follows. It will be given by the scalar product of P, so the polynomial P, and R evaluated at Z. Okay, up. So we need to compute this thing. And so the question is this thing equal to P of Z? Okay, so so that's the question that we want to address, and so let's verify that the scalar product that we have here is indeed equal to P of Z. And so it goes as follows. So we need to explicit the scalar product. So we have P of x multiplied by Rz of x integrated against d mu. Okay, so let's explicit P. This is equal to the, and let's explicit R also. So this is Cp transpose Vd of x. Okay, and Rz of x, okay, is given by the following expression. Okay, so I will put Vd of x transpose M mu D inverse Vd of y, and this is integrated against d mu of x. Okay, and so you see what's going on here. So I can again use linearity of the integral, put all the things that do not depend on x outside. So I get Cp transpose integral of Vd of x Vd of x transpose d mu of x, and this is multiplied by M mu D minus 1 Vd of y. Okay, and here the term that we have in the middle. So let's do the V correctly. Voila. The term in the middle is exactly, so the thing here, this thing here is exactly M mu D. Okay, so the M mu D that we have in the middle annihilate with the M mu D inverse. So this is Cp transpose Vd of, okay, so it should not be y, I'm sorry, it should be z. Okay, so this is a z. and here this is a Z also. Up. And yeah, that's it. Okay, so this is CP transpose VD of Z, and by definition, this is equal to P of Z. Okay, so we have that the term at the beginning is equal to this one, and this is the question we wanted to solve. So since the kernel is unique, we have proved that the candidate R is the reproducing kernel that we are looking for. Okay, so there is a question. So it's time to have a short break and to see if there are any questions. And there is a question. Can you define CD kernels on infinite dimensional spaces? So it depends on what it means by infinite dimensional spaces, because there are several things that could happen. So the first thing, if you consider spaces of functions on a Euclidean space, for example, you have a Euclidean space, but on this space, for example, the space L2 is infinite dimensional. Okay, so there are many other reproducing kernel Hilbert space which satisfy similar property, and even similar properties defined using the integration against a measure. But the underlying function space will be infinite dimensional. So instead of having polynomials of degree D, I will have a space of function which is infinite dimensional. So actually, you take any space of functions for which the pointwise evaluation is continuous. This will give you a reproducing kernel Hilbert space, in the sense that there is a kernel which satisfies the reproducing property. And the construction is actually similar as what we did. You just need to be careful with the finite dimensional. Okay. And then the other part of the question is, what if we replace the Euclidean space by a space of infinite dimension? And this probably, I would say probably, but I never checked the details, so I need to check. I want to say anything wrong. Is CD kernel convergence? How about weak start convergence? Maybe. So that's a great question. We will be talking about that for a long time, actually. So the convergence property, the asymptotic properties of the CD kernel is at the heart of all the theoretical questions of interest, and not all, but most of the theoretical questions of interest regarding this object. It has important consequences in many fields of mathematics. And for us, what will be interesting also will be the asymptotic property. So there are some convergence results, but I'm not sure we will have time to see, to mention them today. Okay. So I only saw 2 questions. Maybe that's it. Let's get back to the presentation. Okay, so it can be computed for moments. Let's see another property. It's important, and I think it's how it emerged actually in the literature. So its relation with orthogonal polynomials. So it was not first described as a reproducing kernel of a certain space. It was, I think, first described as by its relation to orthogonal polynomials. Okay, so if you take now any orthonormal basis of RD, so it's the same as before, but in addition, I want the basis here to be orthonormal with respect to the scalar product induced by mu. Okay, so not any basis, only orthonormal basis. Then for all xy, the CD kernel can be expressed as follows: it's just the diagonal sum of pix, piy. Okay. And I think this is the first expression that came out, and it's very close to something that is called Christoffel-Darboux formula, and there is actually an exercise about it in the exercise section. So there is a full exercise about orthogonal polynomials, some of their properties, 3-term recurrence, zeros, etc., and their relation with the Christoffel-Darboux kernel. So first remark. we are talking about orthonormal basis. So this works again for any orthonormal basis. So if you change the basis, the value of Pix, Piy may change, but the sum here needs to be constant and equal to this. And second remark, if you work, so since the space RD is just a linear space of finite dimension, you have a canonical way to construct orthonormal basis. So this is through the Gram-Schmidt orthonormalization process, and this is at the heart of many constructions underlying the theory of orthogonal polynomials. So you have more of it in exercises. And last remark, which is more like an advice, there is a strong connection with orthogonal polynomials, and in general, if you're doing Christoffel-Darboux kernels, it's a very good idea to work in an orthonormal basis, so not necessarily the orthonormal basis given by your scalar product here, because if you knew it, you would know the Christoffel-Darboux kernel. But in general, it's a bad idea to work in the canonical monomial basis. And here you have a simple example. You take a uniform measure on -1, 1, and polynomials of degree 23. So it's a matrix of size 24 by 24, the moment matrix. And it's in theory it's invertible, but in practice numerically it's not invertible. So it's better to work with other bases like Chebyshev or Legendre polynomials or these kind of things. So let's give a proof for this this claim. And again, the proof is will be very easy given what we have seen so far. The relation with orthogonal polynomials. Orthogonal polynomials. Okay, so we start with the basis. So let's get back to the black color. P1 PSD will be orthonormal basis. Orthonormal basis. Okay, so sorry for my writing. Okay. In this case, that means that by definition, we have that the scalar product between Pi and Pg, so considering the scalar product induced by mu, this thing has to be equal to, so we will use the notation delta ij, and to be more specific, this thing is equal to 0 if I is different from j, and 1 if I equals j. Okay, so that's the definition of orthonormality. So in this basis, what the preceding equality says is the following: M mu d is equal to identity. Okay, so if you have an orthonormal basis, then the moment matrix is equal to identity. And in that case, we have an expression. We can use the expression that we already know for the Christoffel-Darboux kernel. So k, so k d mu of xy, let's say, is equal. So for any, so this will be for any xy in Rp. Let's get back to the previous expression. Vd of x transpose m mu d. Okay, so maybe the d is here. Invert Vd of y. Okay, so this was the previous expression, but in this case, M is the identity, so this is simply Vd of x transpose Vd of y, and Vd of x transpose Vd of y. Vd is just the vector which contains as coordinates the evaluation of the polynomials in the basis at x. So this is simply the sum for I equals 1 to SD. Okay, so this is a bad sum of Pi of x multiplied by Pi of y. Okay, so the preceding claim is just an application of the previous one in the context of an orthonormal basis. Okay, so you have a connection with orthogonal polynomial, and again, this is where it came out, and you have like some elements in the source and exercise section. Let's talk now about another object, which is called the Christoffel function. So again, you have the standing assumptions on top. Okay, and so the Christoffel function will be defined as follow. Okay, so let's parse the expression here. We have, so first it still depends on D and mu, okay, and it goes from RP to 0, 1. So it has one argument in RP and values in 0, 1. And it associates to each Z the value of the following optimization problem. So my decision variable is a polynomial of degree D. The objective is this quadratic form, which is an integral again of p squared against d mu, so it's quadratic in p. And I have one linear constraint. I want p of z to be equal to 1. So the argument of the function here is in the constraint. So this is a Christoffel function. And it turns out that it has a very close relation to the Christoffel-Darboux kernel. And the relation is as follows. We can write lambda of z to be 1 over k of z. Okay, so the following, this gives a kind of a variational formulation for the Christoffel-Darboux kernel, and this is for all z. And we can say even more. We can say that the optimal solution in P, okay, so in this optimization problem, you have polynomial P as a decision variable, and the optimal solution is given by P, which also depends on the Christoffel-Darboux kernel, so it's a polynomial. It's essentially proportional to k of z, and it's scaled so that the evaluation at z is equal to 1. Okay. So there is one question: how do we know if there exists a measure inducing a scalar product with respect to which the polynomial basis is orthogonal? Example, the monomial basis. So it's, in the case of the monomial basis, there is no measure which induces the scalar product. And how do we know if there exists a measure inducing a scalar product? I think it's essentially the moment problem, right? So you have a polynomial basis, you have a scalar product. You just, so the moment matrix will be the matrix which contains all the dot products of elements in your basis. And in this case, yeah, it's a sufficient condition for a positive semi-definite matrix to have a representative measure on RP, I would say. Okay, so in the case of the monomial basis, it doesn't work. Okay, so for the monomial basis, I don't know if this was the sense of the question, the meaning of the question, but okay. So let's get back to this, and let's see how it works with a picture again. So on the left, I represent a cloud of points, and the level sets are, so these are not the Christoffel function. These are the level set of k, z, z, but they are related to the value of the Christoffel function lambda by the relation that we have here. Okay, and so I vary the degree, and I essentially solve this optimization problem here, but for z equal to the red point here. Okay, so I solve the problem here. Z is the red point, and the measure is the empirical measure induced by the points. For degree 1, the kernel, sorry, for degree 1, yeah, the kernel is quadratic, so the sublevel sets are ellipsoids. So I represent the sublevel sets on the left, and on the right, I represent the solution polynomial, so the one that we have here, the one that solves the optimization problem here. So that's how it goes for degree 1. If we let the degree go higher, then the shape of the sublevel set changes, and also the shape of the solution polynomial. So essentially, if you look at the optimization problem, you're minimizing, so you want to be value 1 at z, but you want to have small value overall over the support of mu. And in that case, you want to have small value overall on the point. So the solution polynomial will be this one. So you want it to have small absolute value on the points here. And if I increase the degree, the shape is changing, and the shape of the solution polynomial also. And it's okay. So you can guess that it captures some like shape information on the cloud of points, and this is somehow deteriorating as the degree goes higher and higher. Up. Okay. So let's give a proof argument for this thing. Okay, so Christoffel function, and again the proof is easy using the reproducing property. So Christoffel function. Okay, so I recall the definition lambda d mu of z is equal to the minimum for p in Rd of x. Okay, so polynomial of degree d, p of z equal to 1 of the following integral of p square of x d mu of x. Okay, so that's the definition of the Christoffel function. So let's fix again any z in Rp and any p in Rd of x, such that p of z is equal to 1. Okay. So in this case, I have p squared of z, which is also equal to 1, which is equal to, using the reproducing property, k mu d of z, k mu d of z, x, multiplied by p of x, integrated against mu of x, and there is a square because I consider p square of z. Okay, so this is an integral, and here I use Cauchy-Schwarz inequality, and this gives me k mu d z. Okay, sorry, k mu d of zx squared, d mu of x. Okay, so that's one term, and the second term will be the integral of p squared of x d mu of x. Okay, so this is just Cauchy-Schwarz inequality, and now I can use the reproducing property. The integral of k mu d squared has a simple expression using the reproducing property. So this is k mu d times k mu d, and so the following will be equal to k mu d of z. Okay, and the second term, it doesn't change. Square of x d mu of x. Okay, so the following is true. So so I started with 1. Okay, so the thing here has to be greater than 1. Okay, and the only thing that I asked was that the constraint that p evaluates to 1 evaluates 1 at z. Okay, so since I'm minimizing, this shows that this implies that lambda mu d of z is greater than 1 over k mu d of z. Okay. Okay, because when I compute lambda, okay, so lambda, the expression for lambda is here. I'm minimizing the integral of p squared against the mu, against the constraint. So I take any p in the constraint set, and I obtain an expression which depends on the objective here. So the term that we have here, when I minimize it, I will get something which has to be greater than 1 over k mu d. And the only thing where I potentially lose here is the use of Cauchy-Schwarz inequality. And actually, Cauchy-Schwarz inequality comes with an equality case. Okay, and when do we have equality here? We have equality if essentially the two objects are proportional. Okay, so if k mu d, or more, yeah, maybe better, if p is proportional to k mu d of z. Okay, and so what does it mean, k proportional to k mu d of z? It means the following. We have equality if p, so the polynomial p, is equal to k mu d of, so the first argument is blank, the second one is z, and I divide by k mu d of z and z. Okay, why do I divide by k mu d of z? This is because I want p of z to be equal to 1 here. Okay, so I divide by the term here. Okay, so this is the only possibility for equality, but let's do a sanity check. Okay, let's check that indeed the following polynomial achieves the minimum. And okay, so check up, and this is just computing the integral of k mu d of x z squared divided by k mu d up mu d of z squared, and I integrate against d mu of x. Okay, so the denominator doesn't depend on x, so I can take it out. So this is 1 over k mu d of zz squared, and I integrate. So the numerator doesn't change, k mu d of x z squared d mu of x. And again, I can use the reproducing property. This is just k integrated against himself, and himself is just a polynomial, so it has to be equal to k mu d of z, and the denominator is kept as is, k mu d of z squared, and so this is indeed 1 over k mu d z. Okay, so the polynomial that we have defined here, the polynomial p, is feasible. Okay, p of z is equal to 1. It is of degree d, and the value is precisely the lower one that we had. So that proves the claim. Okay, no other question for the moment. So let's get back to the presentation. So I have a few other things that I wanted to tell you before finishing. So one last property is a fine invariance. So it will be, so I think it's very useful, and it's good to state it formally. So for this, we need a definition. We need to define the push forward measure of mu. So I will not consider invariance against any transformation. I will only consider invariance against invertible affine mappings. So this A here will be a function from RP to RP. It will be an affine map. So if you want, it could be a linear map, but it could also have translations. And I want it to be invertible. Okay, so this means that the linear part has to be invertible. So given this map, I can define the push forward measure S star mu, and it's defined as follows. For any Borel set, S star mu, okay, so there is a B missing here. So S star mu of B here will be mu of A minus 1 of B. So that's the definition of the push forward measure. And an equivalent way to say it is that for all measurable F, the integral of f of z against a star mu, so d of a star mu, is equal to the integral of the composition of f and a against d mu. Okay, so that's push forward measure. And the fine invariance can be stated as follows. So if you get an invertible map, S star mu will be a Borel probability measure on RP. You may consider the Christoffel function associated to S star mu, okay? And you may want to investigate its relation with the Christoffel function at mu. And it turns out to have a simple relation. So the Christoffel function associated to S star mu, but evaluated at A of x is equal to the Christoffel function associated to mu evaluated at x. And this is for x. So there is a simple relation. So maybe before going to some proof arguments, let's see how it looks like in a picture. And again, I take very simple empirical measures, so cloud of points, and I represent the level sets. So these are not the level sets of the Christoffel function, but these are the level sets of the Christoffel Darboux kernel. But as we know now, these are the same up to an inverse. Okay, and so what I do between those three plots, I just consider the original cloud of point and I rotate it or scale it. And at each step, I recompute the Christoffel-Darboux kernel associated to the new cloud of points. And it turns out that while doing so, it seems that the level sets associated to the, for example, the rotated cloud of points are exactly the same as the original ones up to the same rotation. And it's the same with the scaling. So going from the second to the third one is just a scaling. So I just scale the axes. And it seems that the level sets are actually scaled in exactly the same way. So why is it an illustration of the previous fact? It's because in this case, if mu is the empirical measure supported on this cloud of point, then the push forward measure is just the empirical measure supported on the image by A of the cloud of points. So if I rotate the points, then the empirical measure on the rotated points is just the measure, the push forward measure. Okay, so let's give some proof argument, and this will be the last proof arguments for today. So affine invariance. So I think it's interesting to see invariance, okay, because it allows to manipulate things. Okay, so again, A is from RP to RP. And it is affine and invertible. Okay, so I can define the following. I can define the map WD, which associates to each x the value VD of AX. Okay, so since A is an affine map, each coordinates of WD is just a polynomial in X. Okay, so these are polynomials. Right. So I won't have time to do it now, but there is a small exercise. Okay, small exercise. Okay, show that WD is a polynomial basis. Okay, so I did not mention what is VD. Okay, so VD a basis of RD of X. Okay, so it's the same as what we've been, is exactly the same notation as what we've been using so far. So show that WD is a polynomial basis of RD. Okay, so this is related to the fact that the affine map here is invertible. So let's admit this, and in this case there is T, a matrix, which will be from of size SD times SD, so the dimension of the space of polynomials. Okay, and this matrix T satisfies the following: we have for any x in RP, W D of X will be equal to T times VD of X. So it's just so since we have two bases, okay, there is a matrix which allows to pass from one basis to the other, and this is expressed like this. Okay, so now that we have all this, let's compute. So the first thing to compute will be the moment matrix M of S star mu D. Okay, in this basis, M of A star mu D will be, so we take the definition again, the integral of VD of X transpose, but integrated against A star mu of X. And so integrated against the push forward measure. Using the property of the push forward measure, this is VD of AX, VD of AX transpose integrated against mu of X. Okay, so this is just the property that we had here. Okay, so integrating a function against the push forward is similar to integrate, is equivalent to integrate the composition with A. Okay, but here VD of AX is just WD of X. Okay, so it's just the integral of this, the same thing, but with another basis integrated against mu. Okay, so WD of X again is equal to T times VD. Okay, so this is T VD of X, and here I have a transpose, so I have VD of X transpose T transpose d mu of X. And finally, using again linearity of the integral, this is T, M mu D, and T transpose. Okay, so if I, so this works for any change of basis, and in particular for this change of basis, changing the basis, polynomial basis amounts to multiply the moment matrix on the left and on the right by T and T transpose. Okay, so now let's compute the quantity of interest. So again, this was the Christoffel function depending on S star mu evaluated at A of X. I'm not going to compute the Christoffel function because it's easier to compute the Christoffel-Darboux kernel, and we know that both are related. So for any xy in RP, we have so the quantity that, okay, so let's put it here. The quantity that we need to compute is K mu D. No, so it's not mu, sorry, it's S star mu of AX, AY. Okay, so that's the quantity of interest. It's almost the same as this one, using the relation between the Christoffel function and the Christoffel-Darboux kernel. Okay. So let's compute this, but we have already, so this will be equal to, so the following, VD of AX transpose, M, the moment matrix of S star mu, D, inversed, multiplied by VD of AY. Okay, so this is just using the formula that we know, the relation between the Christoffel-Darboux kernel and the moment matrix through matrix inversion. Now we have an expression for the moment matrix in the middle, okay, and so we can simplify this. So this will be WD of X transpose. I can inverse this one, so this will be T transpose inversed, M mu D minus 1, so inverse, and T minus 1, okay, and here I have VD, no, sorry, WD of Y, okay, and I can use my change of basis again. WD of X is just VD of X times T times VD of X, and with the transpose, it gets out, so this is VD of X transpose, T transpose, the T transpose inverse in the middle cancel, M mu D minus 1, T minus 1, and here the same, I have T VD of X. So this is using the change of basis between WD and VD. And so, of course, the T transpose minus 1 and T transpose, and here everything cancels out. So this is VD of X transpose, M mu D minus 1. Okay, so this is getting bad. V minus 1, VD of Y, and this is equal to K mu D of XY. Okay, so this is essentially a change of basis, and this gives a proof argument for the previous slides. Okay, so this was affine invariance, and let's see one last point, maybe. So it doesn't tell you the whole story, but it gives you some intuition why this object is important in approximation theory. Essentially, the Christoffel-Darboux kernel relates, gives a relation between the pointwise evaluation at a given z and the integral of p square, so the average value of p square when integrated against d mu. Okay, so using the variational formulation for lambda, we know that for any z, P, so P divided by PZ is evaluate to 1, okay, so for any P. So NEZ, NEP, this thing evaluate to 1, so it's feasible for the optimization problem here. It's feasible here, so if we plug it here and use the relation that we have here, we know that we have the following inequality. So PZ square is smaller than K mu D ZZ times the integral of P squared d mu. So this is true for NEZ, and in particular, it has, in this case, some relation with what is called Bernstein-Markov property. So we'll state it for mu with compact support. So it will be a property of the measure mu. We say that mu has Bernstein-Markov property if for any P polynomial of degree D, so there is a constant, if there is a constant CD such that for all P of degree at most D, the supremum over the support of P of Z in absolute value is smaller than this constant times the P, the average value of P square integrated against mu. And here I did not tell you, but this is just the norm induced by the scalar product. So it's just the thing that we have here with the square root. Okay, so this is Bernstein-Markov property. So it's not completely Bernstein-Markov property. So we have essentially two norms over the space of polynomials. So these are equivalent. We know that there exists such a constant, but Bernstein-Markov property states that the CD here, so the constant that appears, which depends on D, has to satisfy the following. So if I take CD to the power of 1 over D, the limit of this thing has to be 1 as D goes to infinity. And so that's Bernstein-Markov property, and you can using the previous inequality, you can directly see that the constant that appears here can be taken to be the supremum over S of the Christoffel-Labousse kernel with eventually with a square root. Okay, so it's just the same thing here, but taking supremum over S. Sorry. Okay, so this is not the whole story, but here it gives you an intuition why it's important. It gives you a connection between pointwise evaluation, or if you want supremum norm on the support, and average or L2 norm on the support. And let's conclude with some historical remark. Okay, so the study of this object started in the univariate case. So we only saw real polynomials, real variables, but the whole thing translates to complex variables, and actually some things are easier in the complex setting, and it has many applications. So I give you a few examples: quadrature, relation with orthogonal polynomials. It has also important connection with potential theory. It has application in random matrix theory, etc. So there are really many things here, and I give you a few names of important contributors to the field. And despite all this work, the object is still very attractive, and there is a lot of research going on. And in particular, important questions relate to the asymptotics. So as D goes to infinity, what happens for this object, and also the multivariate setting. Okay, so we've been discussing about the multivariate case. The univariate case is pretty much solved, but the multivariate case is still very, unknown, I would say. And yeah, so let's stop here for today. Okay, so this is the end of my course, and maybe we can go for questions. Okay, so we have 3 questions. Okay. For the fine invariant, the linearity of the map A was also used to preserve that W is still polynomial. Yes, you're right. Yes. Okay. So that's a good question. So, so the question is the linearity of the map. So actually the affinity, I would say, the fact that the map A is affine was something that allowed to preserve the fact that WD in the proof, which was VD composed with A, is still a polynomial of degree D, and this is indeed crucial. And if I take a different polynomial map, I still get something, I still get polynomial, but eventually I don't get a basis. And yeah, I don't know what to do in this case, but I think it's probably a good venue, a good idea for solving some of the questions in the field. But I mean, this is a good idea, but I didn't have time to think about it. Do we know anything about basics for zeros CD kernels? So I'm not sure I understand the question. So the CD kernel itself, so if I get back to the presentation, maybe I should have emphasized this. It is positive essentially. So if maybe, yeah, if you look at the expression here, okay, so if the orthogonal polynomials, so the value here is, if you evaluate this at xx, this will be positive, and maybe this doesn't tell you much. That could be better. Yes, okay, so if you evaluate this as at xx, then you get something that cannot vanish essentially. You get something that has to be positive, because the matrix here is positive definite in the middle. So the value of the kernel is positive. So what is of interest in this thing is the distribution of the zeros of the orthogonal polynomials, for example. So we could talk about zeros of orthogonal polynomials. And maybe I can get back to the question. Maybe one of the possible meaning of the question was, what should we do when this form here, this bilinear form is not positive definite, and in this case we can still do a construction. This is the singular case, and we will see it in coming lectures. What is known about the constant CD for some special sets? So there is a lot known. So I will mention it in the next lectures. So essentially, if we get back to the constant CD, this constant CD is the one that appears in this inequality, and you can take CD to be the supremum of the kernel on the support. So in the multivariate setting, in general, it's not possible to have estimates of this, but for some special sets, okay, so for example, if mu is uniform on the cube, then there are some very precise description of the kernel, and we will see some examples of this. So on the ball, on the sphere, on simplices, on hypercubes, we know the constant CD, and I think, if I'm not mistaken, for the hypercube, the constant is of the order of d to the 2p. Okay, so it's the constant here will be polynomial, and it will be of the order of d to the 2p. Okay, so it will be a polynomial in d, and the Bernstein-Markov property essentially says that the growth has to be sub-exponential, let's say. Does it have a name? Does it have a name? Maybe it has a name. I would say Bernstein-Markov constant. I don't know. So maybe the smallest constant has this name. I'm not sure about it. I need to check. In your first set of plots of point clouds showing the level set of the CD kernel, the point Z was represented with the red dot. Does the choice of Z influence the geometry of the level sets? No. So let's get back to the. So what I represented here is Z. So what is plotted on the left is the sublevel set of the Christoffel-Darboux kernel. And this doesn't depend on Z. Okay, so essentially the level sets represent the value that I compute if the point is moving around. I just left the point Z here to have an idea of the value of the optimal of the problem. But what changes is the solution. So on the right you have the polynomial which solves the the minimization problem. And this one, of course, depends on the choice of D. So if I change Z, the level sets here will be moving. But on the left, they won't be moving. How poorly conditioned are the matrices M? They are like extremely poorly conditioned. So these have, I never remember the exact names. I don't remember if it's Toeplitz or, but I mean, the spatial structure of those matrices, if you work in the monomial basis, is known to be incredibly ill-conditioned. And again, if you do, you can do the experiment. You take the moments of the univariate uniform measure on -1, 1. Then for D equals 23, you have a matrix of size 24 by 24, and this one is not invertible numerically, so at least on my laptop. So it's extremely ill-conditioned, and you get ill-conditioning very very fast. So when I show you this formula, I say that the computation for moments is easy. It is easy in principle. So inversion is at least formally an easy algebraic operation, but numerically it can be very hard. And in many circumstances, the inversion here causes some problem. And essentially, the reason is that if you knew, I mean, if you were able, computing this invert is essentially equivalent to computing an orthonormal basis for the underlying measure. Okay, so there are some tricks, and some of the tricks is not to work in the monomial basis, but work in an orthonormal basis given by another measure, maybe, but not exactly the measure where you started from. So, for example, Chebyshev polynomials. If is satisfied derivatives of CT kernel at Turan inequality. So I'm not okay. So I need to check the Turan inequality. I don't remember exactly what this is. So I cannot really answer this question for the moment. So I need to check this for the moment. I cannot say. Is there any study on whether the ill conditioning survive in multivariate Hankel matrix? So it does survive in multivariate Hankel matrices. Yeah. So the matrix inversion, if you work in the monomial basis, even in the multivariate setting, it's very likely that it will be ill conditioned. And in the experiments that I did, I could not push much further than degree, let's say, between 15 and 20. This is the maximum that I can get for the moment. Okay, so I think there are no other questions. I had a look at all the questions, so maybe we could stop here. If Monique is still here, I don't know how it should go.
I am still here, Edouard.
Okay, thanks.
Thanks a lot, Edouard. So you will take a little time next time to discuss exercises, just to as an indication.
Oh, so sorry, I did not discuss exercises. Yeah, we can start with an overview of the exercises. I have some corrections, so I can give the corrections if needed. I don't know, but maybe I will not spend some time to give the correction online. So I mentioned the exercises during the talk. So there are a few of them. So they are essentially related to what I said. Some of them are very easy, I think, and some of them are harder. So we can have a look at them next time, but it will be not more than 5 minutes, I think.
Okay, but you will post the solution, so this is very good.
I can post solutions, no problem.
Yeah. Okay. Okay, so thanks a lot, Edouard.
You're welcome.
Next week.
Yes, see you next week.
See you next week.